Hi all. This newsletter starts with a quote by Joni Mitchell from her song lyrics. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Here we go. All of us without exception chose to be in a precious human incarnation at this particularly challenging time in human history. This is so even if we don't consciously remember our original soul contracts before entry. The forgetting is part of the master erase that occurs for most of us just after we're born, although some Buddha babies can remember longer. It's the quote-unquote cosmic hide-and-seek aspect of the earth game as expressed in the Vedic philosophy of Leela, divine play. And there's a link to read more about Leela. So why did over 8 billion souls choose to be here now? Well, there's nothing like immense amounts of global chaos, destruction, and suffering pushing at us as quote-unquote encouragement to grow more internally strong and stable to a greater extent than any lesser circumstances ever could. Think of it as spiritual resistance training. It also helps to take into account the truth that life is always the ultimate guru. In any difficult situations, which I call FGOs, aka fucking growth opportunities, it could only help to ask the question, what's the lesson here? Even if it's revealed to be primarily an inside job, like learning how to cultivate faith and equanimity in the flow, rather than caving into existential despair, regardless of external circumstances. The vision that set the theme for this newsletter was downloaded through my channel system just before the full moon eclipse on March 14th. But to make the most sense of it, it helps to look at some of the foundational ideas presented in my last offering, Kali Yuga 2.0. As I reiterated in this last newsletter, only about 2% of souls presently incarnate on the planet are capable of a full awakening, but all of us are here to heal karma at whatever level of mindful awareness we're at. Accordingly, what I'm about to share could be viewed as the basics of a master class and moving to the next level of the human evolution of consciousness. This teaching is firstly focused on being able to accept as is all the paradoxes, contradictions, and polarities inherent in this plane of duality, no matter how seemingly absurd and unfathomable. Then to use this acceptance to internally mirror these fundamental 3D attributes to expand the capacity of our human emotional repertoire, from joy to sorrow, bliss to heartbreak, so that we can feel all these opposites simultaneously as our new normal. This allows us to stretch ourselves to our maximum range and depth of being most fully human. As Carl Jung said, quote, "No tree can grow to heaven without its roots reaching down to hell. In all chaos there is a cosmos, and all disorder a secret order," unquote. My metaphysical philosophy is there's only one being with billions of faces. The most similar Western philosophy is pantheism, espoused by Spinoza and Einstein. Another way to look at this viewpoint, which comes from ancient Taoists and Vedic sages, is that the universe is made up of energy and that all energy is conscious. My download felt like it was coming from the perspective of this one being of consciousness. In this vision, the One saw all beings in the earth plane as integral and unique expressions of this oneness, like waves in an infinite cosmic ocean of consciousness. Far beyond the training wheels of linear space and time that humans in 3D use while learning to be co-creators, the One abides in the spacious present. From this perspective, each and every human being contributes their own irreplaceable emotional and vibrational tone to create a cosmic symphony of the heavens, continuously playing throughout all dimensions. During the course of human history, from the time when there was less than 8 million souls incarnate until now with over 8 billion, This symphony has always been seen and felt by the One as a harmonic whole. It includes the full scope of the gestalt of the entire human experience throughout history, from pleasure to pain, loss to gain, awake to asleep, and so forth, with all the variables in between these polarities included in this transcendent creation that is ceaselessly evolving. As part of the quote-unquote experiment now in progress, as my channels call the Earth Game, each individual soul, through hundreds if not thousands of incarnations, gets to experience the fullest range of the human emotional repertoire as the culmination of the karmic dance. This means that there has always been approximately the same percentage of incarnate souls at any time who volunteer to experience lives of great suffering for their own development, but also in the bigger picture to contribute this particular emotional tone to the always harmonic cosmic symphony expressed by all parts of the One. But no more. For now, with the 24/7 news cycle, we've landed in a novel new predicament. As world-renowned Oliver Sacks, a most empathetic neurologist, said, quote, "Social media is a neurological disaster for the human race," unquote. What this means, as it is playing out now in real time, is that we have no precedent as to how to handle being bombarded by an unending news cycle of seemingly infinite global suffering through war, famine, genocide, plague, natural disasters ad infinitum. And this unrelenting assault is blowing open some of our minds and hearts so wide that we're injuring ourselves by trying to take it all in. A neurological disaster indeed. For not only are more beings suffering on the planet than ever before, as part of the harmonic percentage with 8 billion plus souls, but now, for the first time, we have a daily window into this horror on a global scale. If we allow too much of it in, we could be harming ourselves by diminishing our equanimity and joy. In addition, if we contract for protection, it dims our light and infiltrates our personal reality so that it appears darker. For those of us who have open hearts, with empathy and compassion for all suffering beings, we have not as yet developed the necessary tools we need to handle the onslaught of misery we're witnessing in these dark ages on planet Earth. Consequently, it's overwhelming us and bringing us down tonally to a level of creating some dissonance in the whole. Here's some context. Firstly, we have the Bodhisattva vow. A Bodhisattva is a being who has attained enlightenment but vows not to enter into final nirvana until all living beings are released from suffering. The vow is, "Sentient beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible, I vow to put an end to them. The dharmas are boundless, I vow to master them. The Buddha way is unattainable, I vow to attain it." Then we have an extreme reaction to this vow, which Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche called, quote-unquote, idiot compassion. He defined this as compassion that enables harmful behavior or avoids necessary conflict to spare someone's feelings, often leading to more harm in the long run. More on this in future newsletters. And now I will add a new term to this list, extreme empathy, which I would characterize as feeling others' pain and suffering so much that it makes us ill. Right now, there's an epidemic of extreme empathy coming mostly from doom scrolling on social media, especially images of innocence in agony. Too many photos of extreme suffering are overloading our hearts, minds, and nervous system circuitry beyond which most of us are equipped to handle. So new, more skillful tools are needed so we can stay open and empathetic without going on a permanent news fast, as that is also not why we are here, to bypass the reality of the now. When we feel others' pain and suffering so much that we make ourselves, and in the ripple effect, even our loved ones, sick from the rage, powerless, and fear that arises from internalizing other suffering, we are adding to this suffering rather than helping alleviate it. This is what is creating the dissonance affecting the mass tone adversely as it is experienced by the One. Anything that causes harm incurs karma, so in most cases, when extreme empathy is harming us, it creates, within the divine laws of cause and effect, a future do-over. It doesn't matter where it comes from: karmic predisposition, blown open hearts and minds, survivor's guilt, unhealed trauma, or all of the above. If we're not able to seek help to stop self-harm from extreme empathy, or can receive support by loved ones with some sort of intervention, it can lead to extreme despair and a downward spiral. This is bound to happen sooner or later unless we consciously reverse the direction by, at the least, taking a news fast and dissolving backed up toxic emotions. The emotional effects of doom scrolling are contagious and may affect the tone of our loved ones adversely in a ripple effect. This can cause more mental illness in us and our loved ones, even in certain circumstances, manifesting in some form of physical disease, which feels like it is coming from outside influences and assaulting our well-being. In cases where there is unhealed trauma that is unconsciously repressed from this life and past lives, these wounds can lie underneath a protective layer of rage at our powerlessness to heal injustice, and then there is projected out into our worldview in an ever-deepening loop of darkness and doom. So firstly, in these cases of extreme empathy, there needs to be an unconditional acceptance that taking on the suffering of the world as a modus operandi is toxic and harmful. It is not helping anyone. Of course, it is imperative that we exercise right action to alleviate suffering through word, thought, and deed to the degree it is an authentic expression of who we are and of legitimate concern. This is an important clarification and a separate issue from harming ourselves in the process. For those of us that are empaths, which means feeling everything from everyone in times like this, it's easy to fall into extreme empathy, which can lead to depression. Since the USA election, I've been doing more and more readings for healers working in various modalities who are suffering from extreme empathy that has deepened into extreme despair. And from this has come a desire to check out and drop the body because of fears that the darkness will continue to get worse, which is a legitimate fear. But because they're calling me for permission to check out, I have to remind them that their work here isn't done, and they need to be a counterforce to the darkness by being who they are, a channel of compassion, healing, and light maintained by daily spiritual practices. I've also been dealing with more and more teenagers who are in suicidal despair from too much social media, recreational drug abuse, and not surprisingly, the state of the world. So this hopelessness in the young is another epidemic which I'll address more in future writings. What is the solution, the antidote? The key is to find the balance of the middle way through holding a split screen in our perspective. On the one side, we hold the view of the witness soul as a midpoint towards the level of the one, in which all is playing out perfectly in the divine plan with no victims but only volunteers. On the other side of the split screen, we're simultaneously holding the view of our little self, ego, personality, focus in linear space and time. On this side of the split screen, we need to be very clear on our energetic, emotional, mental, and psychic boundaries, and with immense appreciation and gratitude to really get the difference right here and right now, that most of us are not suffering horribly in powerless situations in our lives like we see on the news. This level of viewing 3D from the split screen is the optimal, skillful means at this time in human evolution to live with this onslaught. For some of us who identify with the warrior archetype, outer actions such as protest marches, etc., are a genuine outpouring of who we are. However, for many of us who identify more as mystics and artists, being true to ourselves is more of an inner action, expressed outward. Through energy and or creations in a ripple effect. This is especially important for empaths and healers, to own that they are not primarily playing out warrior archetypes in this life, and thus need feel no survivor's guilt for being who they are. For these types of karmic development, I suggest it is most important to be in a place of empowerment rather than powerlessness through daily proactive practices, to be cultivating and sending out an overflowing, infinite supply of divine heart energy and compassion for all suffering beings. For more on this, there's a link to my newsletter, and it should be in one of the YouTube audios. Your prescription for maximizing well-being, the Witnessing Protection Program, and the Post-Traumatic Soul Growth Protocol. At this point, it helps to remember, whether through some form of soul reading, or past life regression, or perhaps even having a psychic aha moment while reading this, or listening to this, that all of us have already had many lives of immense suffering. even if we're not in those lives now, our time of loss and sorrow will certainly come again in this life and in future ones, as it's all part of the human range we're here to experience. Accordingly, this is what I always tell my emotionally and psychically sensitive clients. Quote, you've already paid in full karmically to earn your beautiful, blown open heart from many lifetimes of suffering. You just forgot. Exclamation point, unquote. But from this forgetting, all the suffering they see in the world activates their own unhealed, unintegrated past lives of suffering, so it feels as if they're still in this past life of powerlessness. And so time and again I have to remind them that that was then and this is now. To summarize, of course it's a good thing to be true to the vow to alleviate suffering through word, thought, and deed. This needs to be done without relapsing or regressing into not allowing any joy or peace in our lives out of survivor's guilt because we've forgotten we've already paid in full. And that our open hearts, karmically well earned through lives of suffering, are the greatest gift we can share with others and the planet. As Lao Tzu said, quote, if you want to awaken all of humanity, then awaken all of yourself. If you want to eliminate the suffering in the world, then eliminate all that is dark and negative in yourself. Truly, the greatest gift you have to give is that of your own transformation. And for more on this, there's a link to my article in the writing section on pleasure, joy, and bliss. In my last incarnation, based on linear time, I remember viscerally being in a concentration camp and dying there. Furthermore, as one of the more than 6 million who died in the camps, I can assure you that there were incredibly long lines on the other side waiting to incarnate to be part of this mass event, knowing full well what the probabilities were. You may ask why we choose to experience these lives of the most immense suffering. Well, as is always the case when our souls choose excruciatingly challenging incarnations, it's because these type of lives open our hearts like nothing lesser could, as well as burning the most karma ever. There are no victims on the soul level, only very courageous volunteers. Sorrow, loss, and sadness are not toxic emotions that will make us sick, nor is a legitimate concern for the state of the world. In fact, once we have experienced personal loss, and who hasn't sooner or later, sadness becomes part of our emotional tone forevermore. However, what is toxic is allowing rage at the state of the world, feelings of despair and powerlessness, and fear and terror of worst-case scenarios becoming our primary emotional tones. For over 40 years in this life, maintaining the split screen of the timeless soul / witnessing perspective simultaneously with the personal reality of the here and now has been my normal operating mode. And from this place I can observe global suffering with compassion and empathy, but without taking it in, that is, unless I indulge in doom scrolling to excess. This is also because I've been working with suffering souls in despair as my vocation in this and many past lives, and have found that all pain and suffering feel the same on the inside regardless of external causation. And of course, the Taoist practices that I do on a daily basis keep me internally grounded, stable, and able to maintain equanimity regardless of external turbulence. This, along with the psychic empowerment practices, keep me fed by source vertically and sealed with light so that I am able to work with the world as it is without having to contract my heart for protection. I've worked with so many empaths and channels over the past 50 years who have either already fried themselves or are destined for a very high rate of burnout without the split screen, as well as these two spiritual practices, to become fully embodied and root their nervous systems and psychic circuitry to the core of the planet. I must confess that I almost completely burnt out and fried my nervous system once in the early 1980s before I learned my daily practices by taking on more emergency clients than I could truly handle. Edgar Cayce, the great seer, died from this after World War II. And this past winter, after too much doom scrolling combined with taking on more clients in crisis than usual, I felt the need in February to go float in the ocean for a week to expand all the contractions in my systems. But thankfully, this time was not nearly as dangerous for my channel system as before. Thanks to daily vigilance. I also must acknowledge that I have a much harder time with despair arising more than just sadness about man-made climate change that is inexorably destroying nature. which then in the ripple effect destroys the quality of all life on Earth. And for more, there's a link to If This Were Your Last Incarnation, What Would You Do? Which I believe, if you scroll in my YouTube channel, there is an audio of this. If this were your last incarnation, what would you do? We're presently witnessing on the world stage daily acts of extreme cruelty whose primary intent is to harm and cause suffering by the powers that be. The current geopolitical reality is that more than 50% of the world governments are autocratic, and more than 70% of the population globally live in authoritarian states, not democracies. The first step is acceptance that this is where we're at in the Kali Yuga, and we chose to be here. It is a dark age spiritually, where it appears that the overall evolution of human consciousness is in its infancy. That is, if we assess our progress towards awakening with where the mass consciousness is at, which is always the lowest common denominator. So our assignment as the 2%, if we choose to claim it, is for each of us to raise the level of our heart-mind frequency through inner work to accelerate our awakening, but certainly to no longer indulge in extreme empathy or in toxic emotions of rage, powerlessness, angst, and despair. For more on how to release these toxic emotions mindfully, please read Transformation and Healing, a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, quote, "Someone asked me, 'Aren't you worried about the state of the world?' I allowed myself to breathe, and then I said, what is most important is to not allow anxiety about what happens in the world to fill your heart. If your heart is filled with anxiety, you will get sick, and you will not be able to help." Unquote. The highest countering force, the heart medicine, if you will, that humanity needs is for each of us, to the degree that we're capable of, to maintain the soul witnessing perspective and be a channel of divine heart energy, compassion, and light to all, and this means all. The Dalai Lama said, quote, "From the Buddhist point of view, the Chinese officer who is committing the cruel act against a young boy is initiating a new cycle of negative karma. In the case of the child, there is a closure of a particular karma that the child is experiencing. The perpetrator of the crime is in fact an object of more compassion and mercy than the child." Unquote. And then a quote by my favorite Dzogchen teacher, Ngakchen Rinpoche, quote, "Without this wearying world, we cannot find enlightenment. Without the responses, we would be bereft of the fabulous friction which illuminates our Buddha nature. Because Tantra is constantly performing itself in us, through us, and around us, we can either acknowledge it by taking hold of the bare electric cables of existence and non-existence, or try to pretend as hard as possible that it's not happening." Unquote. Astrologically, we're in an especially momentous transitional few years. Spiritualizing Neptune, the great dissolver, entered warrior Aries on March 30th for the first time in 165 years, and will sojourn there for 12 years. The last time was at the start of the Civil War in America. When any outer planet crosses zero Aries, called the world axis, it is considered the most significant point of the entire zodiac, as this is where an entirely new cycle begins. Added to this, structure-ruling karmic teacher Saturn will also move into unrelenting Aries on May 24th, 2025, and be there until 2028, increasing the momentum of this totally new wave of energy moving in. This sets off the major transit of the year, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at zero Aries, starting next month and will be active through 2027. This is the second huge astrological milestone of the decade, equivalent in impact to the global lockdown conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in 2020, which we're still reverberating from. Adding to this theme of immense change, these two major ingresses culminate on February 21st, 2026, when Saturn and Neptune will meet exactly at 0 degrees Aries, indicating the time of the most major new beginnings. This conjunction only happens every 36 years. Neptune is like a tidal wave that washes away all the old Saturnian walls. It is foreshadowing the collapse of antiquated structures, including nations, in order to create new forms. Their last conjunction saw the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Eastern Bloc, and was also the year of the Tiananmen Square protests. Other significant historical events triggered by this conjunction include the Russian Revolution, 1917, the Korean War, and Stalin's death, 1952 and 53. Let us pray that Neptune does her job and dissolves all of the old Saturnian autocratic structures and the power players supporting them that create division rather than unity. Most importantly, Transformer Pluto began his uninterrupted 20-year sojourn through humanitarian Aquarius on November 19, 2024. I've written about this extensively in my last newsletter, Kali Yuga 2.0. And finally, when Trickster of Awakening Uranus first moved into earthy Taurus on March 6, 2019, I wrote that we need to prepare ourselves to be able to witness with equanimity more and more of that which has been known and safe falling away. So now, with Uranus wrapping up his journey in comfort-loving Taurus through April 2026, we will be experiencing this next year, Trickster of Awakening's energies amped up even more. This means we can expect even more, oh yes, unpredictable events, whether man-made and or nature-made, occurring during this last phase of this particular cycle of karmic lessons coming our way on all levels. Trickster of Awakening Uranus will dip its toe into flexible Gemini from July 7, 2025 until November 8, 2025. Then its uninterrupted 6.5-year sojourn in Gemini kicks off April 26, 2026. And for more on Uranus in Taurus, as the last year is always the most intense, there's a link to all your stagnant comfort zones are going, gone. All of the above transits are supporting us as an opportunity to step up the level of our game with the cosmic assistance of accelerated high-frequency energies moving us to the next stage in the evolution of consciousness for those of us that are ready. I've been calling these galactic booster shots, quote-unquote, the quickening, and there's a link to that since I first became aware of them in the 80s. In closing, at this time in history, when the political powers that be, most especially in the U.S., appear to be governing with the intent to cause as much suffering to as many human beings globally as possible, it behooves us to buckle up for a ride of relentless, divine, orderly chaos as our new normal for the foreseeable future. And when it comes to empathy, let us choose the middle road, where we are attuned and aware of all the suffering on the planet and choose to do everything in our power through word, thought, and deed to alleviate this suffering without taking it on internally to the extent of making ourselves and our loved ones ill. This includes daily mind, body, spirit practices for dissolving negative, toxic, and draining emotions as they arise. It certainly helps if we keep to a minimum any daily doom scrolling of dying children or the dying earth, unless we can do it without self-harm. For whether the suffering is from genocide, war, famine, plague, or climate change, it is all fueled by fascism, autocracy, racism, and supported by many of the unawakened, lowest frequency energies of the mass consciousness, who are ignorant and asleep and know not what they do. So holding the faith in a very long-range Taoist perspective that everything is playing out perfectly in the divine timetable and the flow is imperative for our peace of mind in the now. As is remembering to not incur karma by harming ourselves by negating the peace and equanimity of any non-pain moments that were granted. My readings have always said that while pain is a certainty, as in growing pains among other kinds, suffering is optional. Therefore, to the degree that we can stop being attached to pleasure and resisting pain, to this degree will our suffering lessen. And when we are fortunate enough to have moments without pain on any level, then we can more mindfully appreciate and enjoy these quote-unquote non-toothache moments, as Thich Nhat Hanh advises. Finally, when we think of those that are suffering now, if we truly want to help them, may I suggest we metaphorically raise a glass of our beverage of choice, and while of course sending compassion, but also honoring them with a toast to their courage in taking on such a challenging life. Or we can bow to them. So honoring them as they are us, and we are them, and we are all one in the cosmic ocean and harmonic symphony of the heavens in the eternal now. And as I tell my clients when I offer them some liquid refreshment, beverage service is included with the flight. So we can embrace sorrow and joy, destruction and rebirth. So can we embrace sorrow and joy, destruction and rebirth, chaos and clarity, heaven and hell, and all these full ranges of each simultaneously? Can we also give ourselves permission to choose heaven, rebirth, clarity, and joy as our predominant experience, as we're entitled to have preferences? So while it's true that the Buddha said, quote unquote, the great way is easy for one who has no preferences, I always say that we're entitled to have some preferences as imperfect human beings, as they will naturally fall away sooner, but probably later. Wishing us all joy in the journey right here and right now, just as it is. Once we arrive at Source, whether we call it all that is, the divine, the one, or merging with the Tao, which are all names for home in the game, we realize that what we've been seeking has been inside us all along and has infinite levels of depth. Once we've even sampled the one taste of the sweetness of pure aliveness, then what else is there to do but pass it on? What else is there to do but pass it on?